Chapter 17 The Winter Curate. In the first winter after the eastern garrison was established, when the snow lay thick upon the roads and travel became a thing spoken of in memory rather than practice, there came to the provincial temple a young priest from the capital city. He had been sent as punishment for transgressions in the great archives. The order's letter said humility through service, and the posting was as remote as any in the province. The young man arrived with fine robes unsuited to the weather and a manner that made plain he did not consider the posting a posting so much as an insult. Brother Aldrich, the temple's keeper, received him as he received all visitors, with patience, with a bowl of something hot, and with the private understanding that winter makes close quarters of every house it locks its people into. The arrival. Brother Aldrich was sweeping snow from the chapel steps when the rider appeared through the grey afternoon. The man was young, perhaps 25, and rode with the careful discomfort of someone unaccustomed to horses. His robes were too fine for provincial travel, and even from a distance, Aldrich could see the pinched expression of someone who had smelled something distasteful. "Brother," the young man called out, not dismounting. "This is the provincial temple?" "It is." Aldrich set aside his broom and approached. "I am Brother Aldrich, the priest here. You must be Brother Aldous." "I must." Aldous finally dismounted, his movements stiff. Though I had hoped my superiors were exaggerating about the remoteness of this posting, he was not. Aldrich forced a smile. "Welcome, brother. I received word of your assignment. Please, come inside. You must be cold from the ride." Cold, saddle-sore, and profoundly underwhelmed, Aldous brushed snow from his shoulders with distaste. "This is my penance, then. Ministry to this." He gestured vaguely at the village, perhaps 30 houses clustered around the chapel, smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in the snow. "These are good people," Aldrich said, keeping his voice even. "Simple, perhaps, but faithful. You'll find." "I'll find little to interest me, I suspect." Aldous followed him into the chapel, his eyes scanning the interior with obvious disappointment. "No library? No scriptorium?" "We have a small collection of texts, service books, mostly. The essentials." "Essentials?" Aldous laughed bitterly. "I was translating manuscripts older than this entire province. Documents written in languages the High Keeper doesn't even know exist. And now I'm expected to minister to farmers who probably can't read their own names." Aldrich felt a flare of anger but suppressed it. "The order's letter said you would be under my supervision during your time here, that you were to learn humility through service. The order has its opinions. I have mine." Aldous examined the simple altar, the carved figures. "This will be a very long winter." The first services. Brother Aldous's contempt for provincial ministry became clear immediately. When Aldrich asked him to lead the morning rites, Aldous arrived late and rushed through the rites with visible impatience. When asked to visit a sick child in the village, he sent a blessing via messenger rather than go himself. When the miller's wife sought counsel about her marriage, Aldous dismissed her with platitudes and returned to his rooms to read. The work of a priest, Aldrich ventured one evening, is not just scholarship. It's caring for souls. Souls? Aldous looked up from the ancient text he'd brought from the capital, one of the few personal possessions he'd been allowed. "These people have souls, I suppose, in the technical sense, but tending them is work for simple priests. I was meant for higher things." "Then perhaps you should have followed the rules regarding archive access." Aldous's expression went cold. "I accessed materials that should never have been restricted in the first place. The Order fears knowledge. Always has. What I found in those texts..." He stopped himself. "Never mind. You wouldn't understand. Try me." "No." Aldous returned to his reading. "Some knowledge is wasted on provincial minds." Aldrich felt his face flush. He was 43 years old, had served this chapel for 15 years, had studied at a respectable temple college, to be dismissed as simple-minded by an arrogant boy half his age. But he said nothing, because Aldous was right about one thing: the young priest had connections. His family had influence in the capital. One letter of complaint about a hostile supervisor, and Aldrich's comfortable posting could become much less comfortable. So he swallowed his pride and said nothing. It would not be the last time. The tax collector. Arend came to services 3 weeks after Aldous' arrival. Aldrich almost didn't recognize him. The last time he'd seen the former tax collector had been years ago, when Arend still wore fine clothes and carried himself with the authority of Lord Tale's representative. Now he was thin, dressed in worn wool, his face gaunt and bitter. "Arend," Aldrich said after the service. "It's been some time." "Has it? I've lost track." Arend's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I thought I should return to regular worship. One never knows when one might need the gods' favor. The gods favor those who seek them with sincere hearts." Sincere. Yes, that's the word. Arend glanced past Aldrich to where Brother Aldous stood near the altar, arranging texts with barely concealed boredom. "Your new assistant?" "Temporary. A visiting priest from the capital, here for the winter." The capital. Something flickered in Arend's expression. "How fortunate for us provincials. We so rarely receive such distinguished visitors." There was an edge to his voice that Aldrich couldn't quite identify. Not quite mockery, not quite bitterness. Something else. "You should introduce me," Arend said. "I have questions about theology, about the boundaries between the sacred and the profane, about how the order defines what is holy and what is forbidden." Aldrich frowned. "Those are odd questions for a failed tax collector, perhaps. But I have time now, time to think about larger matters." Arend was already walking toward Aldous. "Brother, might I have a word?" Aldous looked up with his usual expression of dismissive boredom, but something changed when he saw Arend. A sharpening of attention, a sudden focus. "Of course," Aldous said. "I'm always happy to discuss theology with someone who appreciates subtlety." The emphasis on that last word felt pointed, directed at Aldrich. They talked for perhaps 20 minutes while Aldrich pretended to organize the offering box. He couldn't hear most of what they said. They kept their voices low, but he caught fragments. "The old markers, yes, I know where several are located. Symbolic language that predates current order doctrine. If one understood the frequencies involved. Strategic approach would require careful calculation." When they finally finished, Arend departed with a small nod to Aldrich. Aldous watched him go with a thoughtful expression. "An interesting man," Aldous said. "He used to be Lord Tale's tax collector. Lost his position some years ago." "Did he? How unfortunate." But Aldous didn't sound sympathetic. He sounded intrigued. "He seems unusually well educated for someone in such a position. He can read and write. Basic mathematics. Nothing exceptional." "No." Aldous smiled slightly. "I suspect he's read things you haven't, Brother Aldrich. Things neither of us would expect a tax collector to know." "What sort of things?" "Oh, just theology. Ancient practices. The sort of knowledge the Order likes to keep hidden from common people." Aldous gathered his texts. "I think I'll see him again. He asked good questions. Better questions than I've heard since arriving in this backwater." He left Aldrich standing alone in the chapel, feeling vaguely insulted and unsure why. The pattern. Arend began attending all services. Morning rites, evening rites, even the midweek devotions that attracted only the most pious villagers. And always, afterward, he and Aldous would talk. At first they stayed in the chapel, speaking in low voices near the altar. Then they began taking walks together, despite the cold. Aldrich would watch them from the chapel windows, two figures trudging through snow, heads bent close in conversation, gesturing at nothing he could see. Once he tried to join them. "Brother Aldous," he called, stepping outside. "Might I have a word?" Both men stopped, turned, fell silent. "Yes, Father." Aldous's tone was carefully neutral. "I wondered if I might join your discussion. Theological matters should perhaps include. We're discussing very specific questions about textual interpretation," Aldous interrupted. "Technical matters from my studies. I doubt they'd interest you. I have studied at a provincial temple college." "Yes." Arend was just asking about variant readings in the oldest manuscripts. "Do you read the temple tongue? The formal register, not the simplified common rites?" Aldrich hesitated. "Some." "And Old Aegean? The language of the founding texts?" "No." "Then I'm afraid the conversation would be rather one-sided. But thank you for your interest." Aldous smiled without warmth. "Was there anything else?" Aldrich's face burned. "No." "Carry on." He returned to the chapel, humiliated, and watched them continue their walk. They spoke for another hour, their breath misting in the cold air, their postures suggesting intense discussion. What could they possibly be talking about for so long? The isolation. By midwinter, the snow had grown too deep for easy travel. The village was effectively isolated. No merchants, no messengers, no visitors from Lord Tale's keep or the garrison. Just the villagers, Aldrich, Aldous, and Arend, trapped together until spring thaw. The enforced proximity made everything worse. Aldous's contempt for provincial life grew more open. He criticized Aldrich's addresses as simplistic. He changed the rites without permission, claiming the capital had updated translations. He spent most of his time in his rooms, reading, emerging only for meals and services. And always, he and Arend found time to talk. Aldrich began noticing patterns. Arend would attend morning rites, linger until the other worshippers left, then speak with Aldous. They'd walk to the village edge, always heading east. They'd return hours later, both thoughtful, sometimes excited. "What do you discuss with him?" Aldrich finally asked one evening. Aldous looked up from his meal. "Who?" "Arend. You spend hours with him. What could you possibly have in common with a failed tax collector?" "Failed?" Aldous smiled. "I don't think he failed. I think he was failed by a system that punished competence and rewarded obedience, rather like what happened to me." "That's not." He's also extremely knowledgeable about local geography, about the eastern lands, about places where the old world touches this one. Aldous took a deliberate bite of bread. "And he knows things about the wizard at the tower. Interesting things." The question sat in the air. "What kind of things?" Aldrich asked. "Just that the wizard isn't quite what he appears. That his work is more complicated than simple plague prevention. That there are old boundaries in the eastern lands, old markers that..." Aldous stopped himself. "But you wouldn't find it interesting. Just theological speculation." "It doesn't sound like theology." "No. What does it sound like?" Aldrich couldn't answer. He didn't know. It just felt wrong. Like watching two men plan something they shouldn't. But what? What could a disgraced tax collector and an arrogant priest possibly be planning that would matter to anyone? The debates. The isolation brought other tensions. During long winter evenings with nothing else to do, the village men would gather in the chapel hall for warmth and conversation. Aldrich would lead informal discussions about the teachings, about faith, about how to live righteously. Aldous began attending and challenging everything. The order teaches, one farmer said, that the old ways were corrupt, that our current faith is the truth. Does it? Aldous leaned back in his chair. Or does it teach that our current faith is convenient? The old practices understood things we've forgotten, new things the order prefers to keep hidden. Brother Aldous, Aldrich said carefully, that borders on heresy. Does it? Or does it border on honesty? Aldous looked around the room. The order destroyed thousands of texts when it consolidated power, burned libraries, executed scholars who knew too much, all in the name of protecting people from dangerous knowledge. But what if that knowledge was simply inconvenient? What if it contradicted the order's authority? The farmers looked uncomfortable. This was beyond their usual discussions of prayer and virtue. The order preserves truth, Aldrich said firmly. It protects people from what? From understanding how the world actually works. Aldous's voice grew more animated. I've read texts the High Keeper doesn't even know exist. Manuscripts describing how reality itself can be shaped through understanding of frequencies and patterns. The ancients knew this. They built structures that still function today, despite the order's claims that such things are impossible. Arend, sitting in the back, nodded slowly. You speak of magic, one of the farmers said nervously. I speak of science, of natural law, of things that work whether the order approves or not. Aldous stood. But Brother Aldrich is right. These are dangerous topics. Better to stay ignorant and safe than know too much and risk the order's displeasure. He left, and the gathering broke up shortly after in awkward silence. Arend approached Aldrich as the others departed. The young man has bold ideas. He has prideful ideas. There's a difference. Is there? Arend's smile was cold. I once thought obedience was virtue. Then I learned that those in power call obedience virtue because it serves their interests. The wizard taught me that knowledge matters more than authority. The wizard humiliated me, yes, but he also opened my eyes, showed me that the order, the lords, all of it built on lies and control. The old knowledge, the real knowledge. Arend leaned closer. It's still out there. In the eastern lands, in the old markers, in the places the order doesn't want us looking. You speak dangerously. I speak truthfully. There's a difference. Arend echoed Aldrich's earlier words mockingly. But don't worry, Father. I'll keep my dangerous thoughts to myself. Wouldn't want to corrupt your simple faith. He left, and Aldrich stood alone in the empty hall, feeling a dread he couldn't quite name. The late night. Deep in winter, when the cold was worst and the darkness lasted longest, Aldrich woke to sounds from the chapel. He rose, wrapped himself against the cold, and crept downstairs. Candles burned at the altar. Aldous and Arend stood together, examining something spread across the altar table. Papers, charts, diagrams covered in symbols Aldrich didn't recognize. This marker here, Arend was saying, pointing. I surveyed it years ago. The stone is already weakened. Natural degradation. If someone knew where to apply pressure, the inscriptions would need to be damaged in specific sequence, Aldous said. Random destruction wouldn't work. But if you understood the symbolic language, knew which marks controlled which frequencies, can it be done safely, without being caught? That depends on timing, on knowing when the wizard is elsewhere. Aldous looked up and saw Aldrich in the doorway. Both men froze. Father, Aldous said smoothly after a moment. We didn't hear you. What are you doing? Aldrich's voice came out higher than he intended. Studying. Aldous gestured at the papers. Arend has an interest in ancient survey maps. I was showing him some historical documents about how boundaries were established. Those aren't survey maps. No. What do they look like to you? Aldrich approached slowly. The papers were covered in complex diagrams, circles within circles, lines connecting points, symbols that might have been text or might have been something else entirely. They looked like engineering drawings, mathematical calculations. He couldn't tell. Where did you get these? He asked. I copied them from the archives before I was sent here. Aldous began gathering the papers. Their theological texts, descriptions of how the old keepers established the sacred boundaries. Fascinating from a historical perspective. They look like. Like what, Father? What do you think they look like? Aldous' voice carried a challenge. Aldrich didn't know. That was the problem. He was a good priest. He knew the teachings, the rites, pastoral care. But this complex diagrams, technical language, symbols, he couldn't read. This was beyond him. I think, he said carefully, that you should not be meeting in secret. That such behavior appears improper. Appears improper? Aldous smiled. Yes, I suppose it does. We apologize for disturbing your sleep, Father. We'll continue our studies elsewhere. Brother Aldous, I must insist. Insist on what? Aldous' voice went cold. That I seek your permission for scholarly pursuits? That I submit my reading material for your approval? I wasn't aware my penance included surrendering all autonomy. I'm your supervisor here. Technically, but we both know that's a polite fiction. Aldous stepped closer, and Aldrich found himself stepping back. One letter to the High Keeper. One complaint that you're interfering with my studies, creating a hostile environment. How do you think that would be received? You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? I've already been punished once for pursuing knowledge the Order finds inconvenient. What's one more transgression? Aldous gathered his papers. But there's no need for conflict. Continue your provincial ministry, Father. Tend your simple flock. And let me pursue my studies in peace. Is that acceptable? It wasn't. It wasn't acceptable at all. But what choice did Aldrich have? Just he struggled for words. Whatever you're discussing with Arend, be careful. Some knowledge is dangerous. All knowledge is dangerous, Aldous said softly, to those who profit from ignorance. He and Arend left, carrying the papers, leaving Aldrich alone in the candlelit chapel with the growing certainty that something was very wrong and the paralyzing awareness that he had no idea what to do about it. The thaw. Spring came slowly. First the icicles began to drip. Then the snow on south-facing roofs turned to slush. Then the roads, still impassable but less so with each passing day. Soon travelers would move again. The isolation would end. Aldrich found himself dreading it. Because he still didn't know what Aldous and Arend were planning. Didn't know if they were planning anything. Maybe it was just theological discussions. Maybe he was imagining conspiracy where there was only academic interest. But he didn't believe that. Not anymore. He tried one last time to reach Aldous. Brother, he said one morning after the morning rites, when the road's clear, you'll be able to return to the capital, to petition for reassignment. Will I? Aldous smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll find my work here isn't finished. What work? Study, observation, understanding how the boundaries between worlds actually function. Aldous looked toward the eastern windows. There's so much here that the Order doesn't understand, that it deliberately ignores. The wizard knows. Arend suspects. And he turned back to Aldrich. I have the knowledge to prove it. Prove what? That the Order's authority is built on lies. That the old knowledge was suppressed not because it was evil, but because it was true. That there are forces in this world that don't care about our prayers or our doctrines. Aldous' eyes glittered with something that might have been excitement or madness. And I intend to demonstrate this. Publicly. Undeniably. How? By showing that the boundaries can be crossed. That the seals can be broken. That what the Order calls unbreakable is just another lie told to maintain control. Aldrich felt ice in his stomach. You can't. Can't I? Watch me. Aldous gathered his things. Arend has agreed to guide me. He knows the eastern lands. Knows where the markers are. And I know how they work. Together, we can. You'll kill people, Aldrich whispered. If the boundaries fail, if what's sealed gets released. Then people will finally understand that the Order has been lying to them. That there are forces beyond its control. That its authority is meaningless in the face of real power. Aldous headed for the door. Don't try to stop me, Father. You lack both the knowledge and the courage. Just pray your simple prayers and hope your impotent God protects you from what's coming. He left. Aldrich stood frozen. Should he report this? To whom? Lord Tail, the High Keeper? And say what? That he'd overheard fragments of conversation he didn't understand. That a city priest was having theological discussions with a former tax collector. He had no evidence, no proof, just suspicions and fear. And even if he reported it, would anyone believe him? Would anyone act? Or would they dismiss him as a provincial priest, out of his depth, imagining conspiracies because he couldn't understand scholarly discourse? The departure. 3 days later, with the roads barely passable, Aldous announced his intention to leave. I'll be taking walks to study the region, he told Aldrich at breakfast, to observe how the local landscape integrates with sacred geography. It's part of my theological research. In early spring, the roads are still dangerous. Arend has offered to guide me. He knows the area well. Aldous smiled. You don't object, do you, Father, to my pursuing educational opportunities? I object to you traveling into dangerous territory with a man who what? Who disagrees with the Order's authority? Who asks uncomfortable questions? Aldous leaned forward. Or are you objecting because you suspect we're planning something but can't quite articulate what, and you're afraid of looking foolish if you voice your concerns? Aldrich's face burned. I think you're making a mistake. Probably, but it's mine to make. Aldous stood. We'll be gone a week, perhaps 2. When I return, I'll have observations to share. Interesting observations. You might even understand some of them. That afternoon, Aldrich watched from the chapel steps as Aldous and Arend departed. They carried packs, walking sticks, and something else, carefully wrapped packages that might have been texts or maps or something else entirely. They walked east, toward the boundary, toward the lands where the wizard maintained his watch. And Aldrich knew with absolute certainty that something terrible was beginning. But he didn't know what to do. Couldn't prove anything, couldn't stop them. So he did the only thing he could. He knelt in the chapel and prayed. Prayed that he was wrong, that they were just 2 men pursuing eccentric theological interests, that nothing would come of their plans. But the words felt hollow even as he spoke them, because in his heart he knew. Winter's isolation had bred conspiracy. Had brought together a proud man with forbidden knowledge and a bitter man with local expertise and burning resentment. Had let them plot while he watched, too timid and too ignorant to intervene. And now spring had come, and they were going to do something. Something that couldn't be undone. Outside, the 2 men walked east through melting snow, their heads bent close in conversation. Behind them, the chapel bells rang for evening prayers.